Sweet. So for those of you that are here and for those of you that are watching this whenever you're watching it, welcome to Crash Course of Climb. This is pretty much a session where we talk about all sorts of stuff about climbing. It's kind of like an orientation to climbing in general. So I updated this. Originally, we had been doing Friday night climbs on Fridays at 6 o'clock, but we decided to update it to Tuesday at 12 just to make it a little bit easier to work with, saves you the time on the weekend, that sort of thing. So it's called Crash Course Climb. It's going to be every Tuesday at 12 p.m. for pretty much the entire semester. All these are recorded and then subsequently uploaded onto our website. I think right now they only have the first one up, so they're kind of slow on recording them, but there should be a total of 3, I want to say, that we've done, and this will be the 4th one that it'll get uploaded soon enough. So primarily, I will be presenting them. My name's Josh Leyland. I'm the climbing tower lead, and if I can, I'll see if I can get some other tower attendants to jump in on these if they feel passionate about one of the topics. But yeah, basically what it is every week we go over a topic, we kind of break it down. I think previously we've done difficulty gratings, we did climbing terminology, and then we talked last week about modes of climbing. So just like the different ways you can climb outdoors, ice climbing, rock climbing, bouldering, all that stuff. Just kind of a big explanation of all that stuff once all know. So yeah, we do have those weekly topics every single week. And for the most part, these are going to be instructional and discussion based. If we got people in the room, then we can talk about things that are going on. And then some of the components, especially today, actually, will be a lot more instructional and kind of just going over straight up like skills and technical things. So yeah, that's pretty much what Crash Course of Climb is. So we'll jump right into it because there's kind of a bunch to do. Today's topic is knots and hinges. By far my favorite thing, probably my favorite topic for climbing. So yeah, rope serves as like one of the most versatile tools that a climber has in their kit. You can use rope to tie into things. You can use rope to extend pieces out from things. You can use rope to tie a camping bin to the top of your car. You can rappel, you can ascend up ropes. Like there's just so much crap that you can do. It's so versatile. So it's very critical, obviously, to know how to tie knots and set up things properly with a rope. So knots and hitches are going to make up the entire backbone of climbing. In general, you can't really climb on a rope without knowing this stuff. You can boulder. I mean, that's pretty much all you can do if you're not doing this stuff. So yeah. We'll start off with just some quick little terms, just to kind of, I'm going to be throwing these around a little bit, and there's just a few things that go with just knots in general that are good to know. The first one we got up there is knots, right? So I'm saying knots and hitches as separate things. I'm just going to be calling everything a knot. I mean, like any arrangement of rope could be kind of called a knot, but there's a little bit of a technicality. So a knot is going to be any arrangement of rope where you're tying something, and then that thing that you tie can just remain tied without needing any other object. So you can just hold it in your hand, you can wiggle it around ideally, and it'll stay in place. It doesn't need to be wrapped around anything or attached to anything to stay tied, which is what a hitch is really. So that's going to be an arrangement of rope that requires an attachment to an object. So if you're familiar with like a slip knot, then that's going to be pretty much what that is. If you wrap something around, tie a slip knot and cinch it down, that's a hitch. So they call it a slip hitch, and some people might just call it a slip knot. Either way, it's essentially what it is. Next up, we got a bend. So a bend is going to be any type of situation where you're tying 2 ends of a rope together to grab onto each other. So we'll learn this one in a bit, but I have a double fisherman's loop. It's just kind of holding these 2 together. If I pull, it's not going to come loose. And in this case, it's holding a loop of cord together, but it doesn't have to be the same piece of material. It could be 2 completely different ropes tying together to make a really long rope. And we call that a bend. So technically what I said, this is a double fisherman's loop. Technically, this whole thing's a loop. I would actually call this a double fisherman's bend or a double overhand bend. Lots of different names for that stuff. But yeah, bend is going to be 2 ropes that are grabbing onto each other. Next we got is a loop. It's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It's when you create a loop on a line. So you can either have an end loop or a midline loop. Now when you're tying loops that are knots, they're going to be fixed to lines. So they're not going to be cinching down on anything. But yeah, you can have it tied on the end with the end of the rope where you use the end of the rope, or you're going to tie it somewhere in the middle of the rope. That'll be a midline loop. Slight difference there. Usually a decent bit of a different process for tying them. And when you do tie something in a midline loop, you're tying it on what is known as a bight of rope. So if I have a bight of rope, I can go anywhere in the rope that I want, and then I just fold the rope, and essentially that's a bight. If I twist it, then I've got some like half hitches or twists. That's not technically a bight. A bite's just technically just a fold of rope, just as is, no crosses. So yeah, that's another important term. We're going over at least one that has that. On the side here too, we also have some notes just about kind of conditions and things. So the first one there is binded. So if a knot becomes super tight and you just can't untie it and it's just absolutely stuck, we like to say that it's a binded knot. It's binded up. It's really tight. Again, this knot, I have it as an example. This knot is a great example of a knot that binds really hard. If I pull the crap out of this thing, I'm probably not going to be able to untie it. So, I mean, that can be bad, but it could also be fine. Like if you want something really secure that you're not even going to untie anyways, then why do you need to untie it? So you might as well use something secure that's just going to get stuck anyways. So we'll talk more about that and when that's good, when that's bad. And the last type of knot that we're going to be talking about today is a stopper knot. So that's any knot that when you have a rope running through something, whether it's like a dedicated belay device or like a dedicated hole, or maybe it's just, I don't know. We talked last week about alpine climbing. If people are climbing in the snow, maybe if they fall into a crevasse, they want to have a bunch of stopper knots that kind of dig into the snow that stop them from falling. So it doesn't have to be like an actual like dedicated hole or device or anything like that. It might just be to jam into random pieces of nature. So yeah, it's just going to try to stop the rope from feeding through something. So that's a stopper knot. Do you have any questions before we start diving into the actual knot tying? As a no. Sweet. So we're going to start off with basic knots. Now, some of these are going to be like, come on, like everyone knows how to tie that, but we're going to put a name to it. We're going to put a reason to it, and we're going to kind of drop back to those terms that we just used and make sure that we understand exactly what's going on with these basic knots. Because these basic knots are going to use a lot of these for building into some of the ones we're going to be talking about. So I have 5 knots here that are super basic. So one that, I'll start with the half hitch, I suppose. So a half hitch is kind of a funky one. So you have a half knot and a half hitch. Those are 2 slightly different things, but they work the exact same way. The best way I can describe a half knot is when you are going to tie your shoes, you always do that first little curl where you pull the 2 strands tight before you actually tie your shoes the full way with the loops. That in itself right there is a half hitch. So if you look at the top part of that half hitch in the picture, that's what you're doing to your shoelaces before you actually tie them. So that way your like shoelace knot has something to land on. That's what that half hitch is serving as. Now the actual half hitch itself, the reason they call it a half hitch in this is, as we recalled before, it has to wrap around something, right? So all they've really done is just pass this through and then they put an object around it. So if I pull on either side, technically it'll kind of hold there, but you'll see that it'll just kind of slip off. So that's not really a complete knot in and of itself. It's just kind of like a piece that goes into other knots. You might tie 2 half hitches. I know there's a knot called a round turn and 2 half hitches, where you literally just take a rope, wrap it around that object, and then do 2 of those half hitches on top of each other. And that's just enough to keep it, attached to that thing. So that's more like a piece of other knots. We'll talk about that a little bit more as we go. To the right of it, I do have a figure 8. So you'll hear the term figure 8 tossed around in climbing all the time. We'll go over it a little bit later, but the figure 8 follow through is like your standard tie-in for climbing. The actual just plain figure 8 by itself, though, is going to be that right there. So we'll go over the overhand first before we hit the figure 8, just because there's a slight difference. So most people will call it a pretzel knot. They don't really know what to call it. They're like, oh, that's just a knot. Like if you think of tying a knot in your head, you probably think of the overhand immediately. And an overhand really is all it is just that pretzel knot where you take it, pass it through, and then you can tighten it down. Those are those knots you get in your phone charger that like ruin your charging. So stuff like that. So an overhand technically is a stopper knot. If I am feeding a rope through something like my hand and I just pull the rope, it's eventually going to get stopped by this overhand knot, right? So that is a single overhand. When I was talking earlier, I showed this double fisherman's or double overhand bend. This is actually because it's 2 double overhands. And when you double an overhand, you just go through that pretzel twice. If I go in one time, I'm going to wrap around and just go in again. And if I tighten this down, that's how we get that double overhand. It kind of just cinches down into it. And this is another stopper knot. This is a double overhand stopper. If I did a third, they call it a barrel knot or a triple overhand stopper. So you can kind of add on to those. But yeah, the technical name is going to be the overhand. If you're calling it a pretzel knot, people will know what you're talking about. But I guess if you want to be technical, it is an overhand. Now, slightly different from that overhand is the figure 8 up there. So if I have a bite of rope, what I would do to make that the overhand, right, is I just go in the back here. But if I want to make that figure 8, I'm going to wrap around 1.5 times. So like a full time would be going all the way around and in the back. Then, that's going to be a little bit different. But if I decide not to go in the back, but the front instead, and I pass through just like this, that's how we get that figure 8. So it's going to look like an 8 for the most part. But yeah, this by itself does also serve as another stopper knot. So if I pull while I'm feeding through my hand, you'll see that this rope just kind of cinches up against my hand. Kind of forms a little bit of a weird formation here, but it is still that figure eight, right? So yeah, if you hear figure eight by itself, you might hear it's called figure eight stopper or Flemish stopper. Usually for some reason with figure eight related things, you can also call it a Flemish thing. So Flemish bend, Flemish tie-in, something like that. Typically it'll be a figure eight though. Now one knot that most people are completely aware of, but they have no idea what the name is, at least before they hear it, obviously, is the girth hitch. So if you've ever taken a rubber band and attached it to a hole, you've probably already tied a girth hitch. So if I have this cord here, basically all I'm doing is passing it over an object and then putting the rest of it through itself and then cinching it nice and tight. And that gives you that girth hitch there. There's like one or two ways to tie this. You can tie it with the end of an object sticking out or without the end of an object sticking out. But yeah, it's just a very simple way to keep something attached to another bit. You should be having a loop ideally. If you don't have a loop, then it's not really the best knot to use because you don't want to be like feeding the rope around and moving the knot. It's more just an attachment point for a loop. So in that picture there, you do see a sling that's girth hitched to just some random piece of rope. And that's pretty much what you do. It's mostly going to be with those flat types of slings that you're tying girth hitches. You can do it with cord and rope too, but typically it's going to be on something like that. Cool. Then on the bottom part there, we do have slip knot or slip hitch as they call it. There's like 2 or 3 ways to tie it. Really all you need to do is if you have a rope, you can make just like a pass over. So you have a twist here. I've twisted it, made a little loop. And then if I take a lower piece of rope and stick it through that twist in a way that it makes a knot, then I'm going to get some sort of slip hitch here. So if I tighten this down, it's going to rely on my hand to stop it from moving in order for it to stay in place. So it is a slip hitch really. And when I bring it out, if I pull it or do anything else with it, it just comes untied. Also another knot that a lot of people are completely aware of, just don't really think of it in climbing terms or something like that. So yeah, those are 5 like super basic knots. The half hitch especially is going to play like something of a role in some like 1 or 2 of the knots that we're doing, just like little bits of turning the rope. Like as I did before, this is getting close to being like a half hitch, I guess. You could, if you like pass the rope through them, that's kind of a half hitch at that point. So that's sort of a starter there. So do we have any questions about these basics or any other basics that we might not have on here right now? Hanging tight. Cool. All right, so we'll actually just jump into climbing knots then. So these are knots that are going to be somewhat useful for different aspects of climbing, whether it's hiking up towards a trail or actually using them while you're climbing, that sort of thing. So I do want to preface this. So there's a fantastic website. It's absolutely beautiful. It's called animatedknots.com, and that's where I'm getting most of the pictures from for this presentation. If you ever want to look at just like knots for basically anything they have, they do it by category. This picture here is going to be all the climbing knots that they have to offer. So I'll say like probably all of these, like except for like 1 or 2 of them, are actually like super useful and used quite regularly in climbing. So like these are good to know. I'm going to be picking from a few of these and maybe like 1 extra from someone else and going over those today. But if you do like feel really interested in this and you want to like see a quick diagram of how to do it, they do like a slideshow where you just like press a button and it shows you as it's being tied how to tie it. There's like full descriptions on what they're good for, their history, that kind of thing. So yeah, it's a super nice website. They have an app as well. I do have it. It's nice. But yeah, so we'll be pulling from that for the most part today. So again, that's animatedknots.com. If you type in /climbing, you'll get that quick reference to climbing stuff. So the first one is a classic. If you're doing anything at all with ropes, you probably should know this knot. Like it's just, I believe some people refer to it as the king of knots. Like it's just super basic, super important, and very, very useful in many scenarios. So yeah, it's called the bowline. Some people say bowline. I hear it's usually bowline. As I said before, it's a foundational knot for many disciplines, especially boating, especially climbing, scouting, search and rescue, all that stuff. This is going to be a pretty foundational knot for all that stuff. So what this is, as you can see, is it's an end loop. It's a fixed loop that's going to come in the end there. So just real quick, I'll tie one just to show you the functionality of it. So if I have a bowline just kind of sitting here, if I do tug on it, it's not going to do anything. And in this slide here, you can see that it typically doesn't bind like I said. So I can pull the crap out of this thing, and it's either going to hold or break, but it's not really got that in-between binding scenario. If it's a weird material, like maybe it's like waxier or it forms, it's a little softer, then there's a chance that it could bind, but it's just super duper low. Now the problem with this, the single bowline, just regular as is that it can be shaken loose. If I have this and generate a lot of a shake over time, you can already see that it's starting to loosen up quite a bit. If I keep going, then this will just pop out and the whole thing will untie itself. So you might be thinking like, why is this even useful? Why bother? Well, it's going to be good for situations where you tie it, put it on something, and then it's loaded. Because while it's loaded, it can't loosen. Like it's just going to stay where it is. So for climbing purposes, really, if you tie a variation of this, you can basically like tie the end off to secure it. This actually makes a great tie-in. It's easy to untie afterwards if you were to fall onto it. Like I said, not this particular bowline on the picture as is. You'd have to secure that end. But yeah, it could be good as a tie-in. It could be good to wrap a rope around a tree and then secure something to a tree. So whether that's an anchor or just some, like maybe you have a dog and you want to secure it to a tree, then there's a lot of things you can do with that. So we will go over probably two of the best ways to tie this right now. So I'm going to try to turn my computer a bit so I can get a good look at this. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to have the rope with the end of the rope just hanging down, kind of draping with extra room. And with the rest of the rope, I'm going to carry it in my hand so that the end of the rope is running down through my hand towards me. The rest of it, I mean, technically is running up, but the rope's just coming to my side over here, so we can't really see that. So yeah, it's just draping down over here. What I like to say for tying this is what we're going to do is we're going to grab the rope straight on. So I'm grabbing that working end where the end of the rope is. I'm just going to grab it straight on. And what I'm doing is I'm going to look at my wrist, the bottom part of my wrist that's facing towards me. And essentially what we're going to do is we're going to move our hand up and then you're going to look at your watch. So kind of rotate your hand like that as if you were looking at a watch. So that way you can twist it up and it will make a loop that looks like that. The thing that's important here is that this running end goes up, runs, and then the rest of the rope is behind that end of the rope that you're starting with. If you don't have this loop correctly, so say I turned it the other way, now the running end's behind, then when I go to tie it, it's just going to collapse immediately. So, I mean, at least with that, you know whether or not you're doing it right by the fact of it, being tied or not being tied straight up. So again, I'm going to grab that. I'm going to move my hand up while looking at my watch, and then I will have a loop that's twisted like that. Sweet. So as you can see in the picture, that's kind of that part where the two strands are running through. That's just that little loop there. Now all we need to do is we're going to travel behind and go into this loop from behind. You'll note that I still have that rope kind of in my hand above. I'm going to go behind this strand that's above, that's going to the rest of the rope. So I'm going to travel behind it. It's just kind of hard to see, just like that. And then I'm going to go into the hole that I originally came through the back of, now through the front, just like that. And if I grab this left side of the loop and then this strand as well at the same time and pull on my working end, or I guess like the rest of my rope there, when I cinch it down tight, it's going to make that bowl and it's all going to kind of come together just like that. Now, some things to note, I commonly see people when they're first tying this, when they get the rope passed around and back, they'll pull it really tight because they want to tighten down the rope, and then you just lose all the slack that is your loop. So when you do put it through the back of this loop here, you want to put it in, and you're not going to immediately just pull all the rope. You want to put it in, get it wrapped around that rest of the rope there, and then put it through. And then you're not trying to cinch the crap out of it. Like you're just going to grab whatever working end that you have that you would like to have that length, and then pull down on it just so you can tighten that down real quick. So yeah, that'll be a bowline. You can give it a good tug. It's working there. I'll have successful bowlines. It's cat and Oliver. Is that a yes? Is that a no? Sweet. So we'll go through it like one more time just to get it. Oh gosh, why isn't the crow pitch? Unbelievable. There we go. So yeah, again, we're going to have the rope, the backside, but the back of my hand, we can just kind of not pay attention to that. I have all the rope that I'm working with in front. I'm going to have the rope grabbed by my right hand is what I'm doing, and I'm going to push the rope up while looking at my watch so I can rotate it. I guess in essence, I'm making a P is what I sometimes say as well. So if you look at this, it's kind of technically making a P. You got that end of the rope is on top of what's going to the rest of the rope there, so it looks just like this. And this again is running down to the end of the rope there. With that end of the rope, I'm going to come through the back I'm going to travel behind this working end, not the working end, the free rope that I have in the back here. So I'm just going to go behind it, just like that. See if I can get a better view. And then I'm going to pass it through the front here. I think all of you have a bowline, it looks like. Sweet. What about you, Cap? How are we doing? Gotcha.
I don't, but it's okay.
Okay.
Next one.
All right, I'll probably, for the next couple knots, I'll actually take the screen share off. That might help. With the bowline, there's like so many ways you can tie the bowline. There's probably 15 plus bowlines that I know of that are good for all sorts of different things. You can tie a double bowline, that's good for a tie off. There's all sorts of random tie offs. Some of them are decorative, some of them are more about functionality. You can tie a bowline that has 2 loops coming out of it. There's a bowline that you can just tie. You can basically just tie this bowline just off of a bite, and then it'll just be thick and have 2 loops and be on a bite. There's a water bowline. There's all these different bowlines that are good for all sorts of different things. So like learning this one's a great start, but there is a pretty limited amount of use to this one if you use it just like this as is. So yeah, good starter knot, good useful one. It's quick to tie, works well, and it's quick to untie as well. So next one we're gonna look at is so simple in appearance. Like it just looks like, just like basically nothing. You like wrap it around 2 or 3 times and then that happens. But there's a little bit of complication to tying it sometimes. It depends on how you're tying it. So there's probably like 5 ways to tie it. This is called the clove hitch. So again, that's a hitch, so it relies on an object. That's why it's wrapped around a pole in this case. So it's pretty simple, and it's a really effective hitch that has a lot of different applications, primarily for attaching directly to something. So for example, if you have a climber that has some sort of connection point into a wall, an anchor, if you will, and they need to attach to it, they might throw a carabiner on it and then tie a quick clove hitch and then pop it on that carabiner, then they're there. So in this case, if you look at the rope, if you pulled on either that end of the rope that has the red tag on it, or if you pulled on the just rest of the rope that's hanging on the bottom, if you pull on either side, it's going to cinch and stay where it is. It's not going to feed the rope through, ideally. It does technically move a little bit over time. The reason someone might use this over other knots to secure themselves is that it's super fast and it doesn't consume that much material. Like I said before, there's a lot of ways to tie it. There's one-handed ways, there's two-handed ways, there's ways where you feed the rope around the object. There's ways of doing it just off of a bite. Lots of different ways to go about it. So I think I'll go ahead and take that screen share off real quick, and then we'll go over. Oh gosh, I'll go over a couple ways to do this. So can you all see me? Awesome. So we'll start off with tying it in the air, because that's probably one of the easier ways to work with it. So the first thing I'll ask you to do is try to get the end of the rope away from you. Just put it wherever. And then if you have just like a bite or a middle of rope just to work with, and that's what we're going to use. If you're close to the end of that rope, you might accidentally let it pass through and then it might not work out. So really what we're going to do is you can choose whatever direction you want to do this. So we're going to make a loop basically just like with that bowline, except this time it doesn't really matter which way you start. You can do, you can do it to the facing in. You can look at your watch, look away from your watch, whatever you want to call it. Personally, I'm going to take it like this and then kind of look at my watch again. So I'm rotating that to where I can see my watch if I have a watch, and then I get a loop. The only thing that you need to make a clove hitch work out is to do that exact same loop the exact same way that you did it next to that loop that you've made first. So if I make the first loop here and do that, I'll secure it by grabbing it and I'll move down the rope and I'll do another one exactly like that. So I can have 2 loops that are exactly the same orientation right next to each other. And if I'm doing it like that again, if I make a loop, I move down and then I make another loop. That new loop that I've made, I'm just going to stick that underneath of the first one. And if I do that and put something through this hole, I'm going to have a clove hitch. So in this case, I'll use a carabiner because I have one sitting around. If I clip that in and then pull either side, it's going to cinch around this carabiner and then make that clove hitch like we saw in the picture. And then again, if I pull on either side, it's pretty secure on either side. So I'm going to double check, make sure we're all good here. Looks like you have a cat. How about you, Oliver? Sweet. Brooke, do you have a rope? Nothing there. Sweet. And Christina, I don't know if you're following along, but if you have a rope, you can go for it. So yeah, so we have the rope. Again, it's just a fold, and then you're going to do another fold, the exact same orientation. That's the most important thing. If I do this the other way and then try to put it under, I'm going to get just like a loop of rope that falls apart and doesn't do anything. So it's got to be that exact same way. We technically call this an air clove because you're tying it in the air. It has its own particular uses. But yeah, it cinches down on my thumb just like that, and that's how it'll work. Now, if we run into a situation where we're trying to tie a clove hitch with an end of rope, because like, let's say it's a pull-up bar, for example, right? So a pull-up bar is secured from both sides, right? So you can't just tie it in the air and then set it onto the object because the object is completely closed off on both ends, right? So kind of like in the picture on the presentation we saw, it's just a bar and then there's just a clove hitch in the middle of it. In that case, you would have to tie it with the end of a rope because you just have no way of placing it on there. So what we do in that case, and I'm just going to use my arm kind of, I guess, is you're going to take the rope and drape it over. I'll drape it over this way. So I got rope going onto my arm, and this end has come closer to me. Really all you need to do is on this side, I'm going to cross over. So now I've made an X, right? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come parallel to this strand right here, just creeping right next to it. So if I pass on the inside here, I'm just going to go right next to the strand. And you'll note that this end's going up, this end's going down, and I made a clove hitch. So if I pull on either side, it's going to cinch down on my arm. If I pull it, since my arm's a little wide for this, it's going to move a little bit, but it is holding. I'm actually pulling on this right now as is. And that's how you'll tie a clove hitch with an end of a rope. So this one's not, for climbing, it's not particularly useful. You're almost never in a situation where you have to tie the clove hitch just like that. You'll either typically be doing an air clove or a one-handed clove hitch of sorts. So let's see what we got. I guess I'll do it one more time. So if I have the rope, I'll drape it over my object. When I'm wrapping around, I'm just kind of like wrapping around in the same direction. But when I'm doing so, I'm going to make an X and cross over. And then I'm going to make sure I insert this rope directly parallel right next to that rope that I'd started with so that it comes through and out of where I've crossed. And that'll give you that clove hitch that you're looking for. Now, if you are tying it like this, you want to make sure that you have plenty of end to work with, because if you do kind of move it back and forth and work it, eventually, as you can see, it's going to just kind of work its way through until it pops off and fails. So make sure you have plenty of end, or you secure the rope somehow. Maybe you tie it to the end that's getting pulled, or you tie a stop or knot, something like that, and that'll probably stop it from coming off. But for climbing, I mean, typically, like I said, you'll be tied into a rope and you're connecting from a bight of rope to a carabiner. So one side's tied to you, so it can't come untied, and then the other side is going to like 200 feet of rope. So very unlikely that that'll all slip through at the same time. So I'll go over one more way to tie it. I don't think everyone will just have a carabiner available, so I'm going to go over a one-handed way. So this is another version of an air clove, but it's a way to do it with just one hand. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to have that end of the rope, again, away, just pretend it's not there. And this is more like a party trick type of thing. This is kind of funny. So what we'll do is we'll have the rope, and we're going to put it in our hand just like this. So it's going to be a rope passing in front of our three fingers in the middle and behind our thumb and our pinky. It's just kind of in like that, right? Now, what I like to do to make this a little bit easier is I'm going to take the rope over here and just kind of not hold it tight, but just keep it secure. And what I'm going to do first is with that hand, you're going to turn it towards you like that. I'm going to come under this rope that I'm holding somewhat tight. And with the loose rope, that's all the way on the other side, so away from the side that you're holding tight, I'm going to wrap my hand below and grab onto it with my index and thumb here. This is a little funky. Now, once you have that piece, you can close your fingers, and when you pop up, you'll just have a clove hitch on your thumb ready to roll. So I'll do that one more time because that's super confusing. It took me like forever watching this one video to find this. So again, we have that. I'm holding in my other hand the rope somewhat tight, kind of. I'm going to turn towards myself. Yep, just like that. So turn towards yourself, yep. Now bend the hand inwards and kind of move a little bit closer. I guess you just move it inwards, yeah. And then I'm going to capture the piece of rope that's dangling right here below between my thumb and index finger. So like that. And then if you kind of reverse that process and then just pull it up with those fingers pinched, on your thumb, there'll be a clove hitch. Looks like, I think Cat got it, right? Nice. And if you practice that, you can, have the rope and then just tie a quick clove hitch just like that. And it's more of like a quick and easy thing to do. You can do it with one hand. And at this point, you could put that on a carabiner, on an object that's got a free end is the idea. Oliver, how are we doing?
A little lost.
I gotcha. I'll do it one more time just for fun.
Okay.
So yeah, again, we have that rope somewhat secure over here. Ropes in front of the three fingers behind the thumb and pinky. And then I'm going to rotate the hand towards myself. I'm going to bend it forward, kind of roll it towards, I guess, bend it to me, so it's backwards. So I'm going to bend it towards myself. And then the whole idea is to capture this rope between my thumb and index finger. So I'm going to kind of rotate down, grab that. And then once you have that, keep it locked. And then unrotate, I guess, and so that it's on your thumb just like that. Do you have it? Nice. Cool. Rick, we got it. I think I can see. Sweet. Yeah, if you work that one kind of fast, you can definitely get in the motion of like whipping a clove hitch up real quick, just like that. So yeah, that's going to be the clove hitch for the most part. You could totally tie it with one hand like that. Now, why would you want to tie it with one hand, right? So if you're climbing and you reach a place to attach yourself, like I said before, an anchor is what I was calling that. If you are on the wall, you are either holding onto a hold or you're holding onto the anchor to kind of keep yourself actually on the wall. Maybe you're holding on to the carabiner even, like you might grab the carabiner and just kind of open it up from the bottom just to keep it wrenched open and keep yourself secure. And in that case, you have one hand where you can throw a clove hitch onto a beaner, let that thing go, and then you've secured yourself. So it's kind of nice to have that one hand just to, do that so that way you don't have to find a really bouncy spot to be or find some other quick connection so you can have your belayer take you tight and then tie it with two hands. Makes it a little funky. So clove hitch, real super helpful knot. Are there any questions on that at all? Sweet. All right, so we'll move on to one of the other knots we have. So yeah, this one's the double fisherman's. I was showing this one a little bit earlier, at least like the finished version of it on my piece of cord here. But I'm going to be tying it on this big rope just to make it a little bit more visual. So the double fisherman's, also known as the double overhand bend, is a super secure way to put two ends of a rope together. Really great for joining two ends of climbing rope or joining two ends of a cord loop for other uses. Now, the problem is that it is really easily binded. Like you could pull it with just your own hand force, you could put it on the ground, step on it, and then just pull up on the rope. And there's that chance that it actually might become so tight that you can no longer untie it. So either have a knife ready if you're planning on retrieving the rope somehow, or just commit yourself to, knowing you might not be able to untie it. Typically with climbing rope, since it's a little bit thicker, even if you do weigh it down, it's still able to be untied. It just might take a while. With things like prusik cord or cord loops like this that are smaller diameter, if you really use it a lot, it's somewhat likely that you're not going to untie it. And for the most part, with like loops of cord like this, most people commit themselves to not untying it anyways. I've already resigned to not untying this anymore. It's pretty rock solid at the moment. So we'll take it for what it is. So yeah, what do we need, right? We need two ends of a rope. So I've got this side that's got a yellow end cap on it, and this side that's just normal. And I'm going to tie these two together. Best way I can describe what a double fisherman's is a fireman's handshake. So just kind of grabbing onto each other like that, and then it cinches down nice and tight. And that's how it works, right? So if you've seen like friendship bracelets that are adjustable, typically this is the knot they use. They just don't cinch the crap out of it. They just keep it loose for how you can use it. So what we need to do is we're going to have, actually I'll exit out of the screen share so we can see a little better. Goodness gracious. So we've got the two ends of rope here, and we need to pass them over each other. What's important here is that we need to make sure that both ends are running opposite directions of each other, but are still parallel. So I've got, both ends just kind of going towards each other. When I have them set up like this, I'll typically just grab in the middle just to secure where they are and work with them from there. What I'll do then is I'm going to take a decent amount of rope, whatever you think you need, and I'm going to start to wrap around this rope. So similar to the clove hitch, I'm going to wrap around. So I'm going to wrap forward, I guess, going down where the rest of the rope is that's hanging here. But then I'm going to make an X when I come back over. So get my hands out of the way. So really all I've done is I've wrapped around and I've made an X. And I'm continuing to wrap towards this hand. I started down, but I'm wrapping up. And then when I come forward here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass it through this X. So one way I've seen it taught that I think is really neat is if you have your finger pointing down, what you're going to do is you're going to wrap around your finger. Then you're going to make an X on your finger. And then the way your finger is facing and where it is, I'll get that X a little more visible. You're just going to replace your finger with the end of the rope that you're currently working with. So if I have this end here, it's just going to take the place of my finger. And if I push that through exactly the way my finger was, then I get this kind of formation here. If I pull it tight, that's going to give me a double overhand wrapped around the rope, right? So to finish off the double fisherman's bend or the double overhand bend, I'm going to do the exact same thing on the other side. So what I want to do is I'm going to just turn it upside down and do exactly the same thing. I'm going to wrap it the same direction too. That's also sort of important because we want to make sure that it's nice and neat and tied it up and it looks good in the end. So I've got the end of rope here, and this is now running to the other side of the rest of the rope. And now I'm just going to do that same thing again. I'm going to put my finger down. I'm going to wrap the rope around it one time. I'm going to come around and wrap an X on it, just like that. So it's got that X. And as I'm coming around again, I'm going to replace my finger with the rest of the rope. It's going straight down the exact same orientation and in the exact same spot. So I'm going to get a little more rope because I was running a little low there. And if I do replace it, I can tighten that side down and have another double overhand. To finish it off, you just pull both of the strands of the rope that you have, and you can pull it kind of tight. This is really to see that it starts to bind because the whole thing starts to kind of feed and move. So if you do start to pull like the crap out of it, it's going to end up looking pretty wild. So when I say it's well dressed, or if I wanted to keep it neat, you'll see that all four of these strands are running nice and clean, nice and parallel, just like that. And then on the other side, that's where the actual knots are. So they're just bunched up right on each other. Technically, it could be tied, not well dressed. So that would be one of these crosses is over on this side, and then there's like the two pairs here, or the one pair here. But it's still going to function like for the most part the same way. But you do want to try to have that knot well dressed and looking good. So yeah, that's what we got for the double fisherman's. I'll go ahead and take this apart and tie it one more time just to keep it a little clear. Sweet. So again, starting with the ends of rope running against each other, opposite directions, and just kind of parallel on top of each other. I'll grab the rope, and then I'm going to take the end that I'm tying with, put my finger down on the rope, just running on top of the rope as if my finger is a part of the rope, and I'm going to wrap around my finger. So first thing I'm going to do is wrap it once, wrapping up towards my knuckles. I'm going to get an X going, so the X is right there. And then I'm going to, as I'm coming around, replace my finger with the rope. So directly through there. Again, that's the exact spot where my finger was, the exact direction where my finger was going. That's where that end of the rope is going to be heading towards. Next thing I do is turn it over and do the exact same thing on the other side. So again, I got the end of rope over here. My finger is now one with the rope. I'm going to wrap it around, wrap it over again, make that X. Again, heading towards my knuckles, not away from my knuckles. And then replace, I'm gonna get some more rope. Replace that rope, or replace my finger with what the rope has left over. So I'm just gonna take my finger out and then put the rope in exactly where it was. And if I cinch it down, get that double fisherman's. So we all have it so far? That looks good, Kat, nice. Sweet. Are there any questions at all on the double fisherman's bend or the double overhand bend? Sweet, yeah, so again, this is gonna be pretty useful for loops of cord that you don't really care about, you just need it to be a loop, and that's what you wanna have it for. Lots of uses for loops of cord. We're gonna talk about one in particular in just a bit. Or if you need to join two ropes to maybe get a longer rappel rope. Of course, when you have something like this, if you're moving down the rope with a device, you're going to have a knot to pass. That's a topic for another day. But it does extend the rope greatly and is a secure way to put two ropes together just like that. Sweet. So we'll get back to the presentation. I believe the next knot is going to be our figure eight follow through. So that's like, if you're going to learn a knot for climbing, this is probably the best one to know. So the figure eight follow through is it's the standard for tying into a climbing rope. For a long time now, it's been the standard for tying into a climbing rope. It's extremely strong. It's very secure, and it's super recognizable. Like if I look at this from 100 feet away before someone's climbing, and I just want to double check to make sure that their tying is secure and correct. It's very easy to look at this knot and then know it's correct once you've gotten used to tying it and you know what it looks like and you know what like the proper dress version should be. This knot can either be tied from a bite to produce that, so you could use a loop of rope to make that exact knot, or it could be tied in as a follow through, which is what we have this as. When you tie a follow through knot, you start off with a single knot and then you just pass the rope back into the knot and start to retie it and retrace your steps as you go back through it. So yeah, this knot, like again, standard tie-in. If you go to any indoor climbing place that offers ropes, they're going to tell you to tie in with this rope. Outdoors, like 95% of people or so are going to be using this tie-in. There's other tie-ins technically, but this is probably going to be your best bet, one of your safer options. The only problem with this knot is that if you don't properly tighten it down and seat it before you start using it and you take a bunch of falls on it, it can become somewhat difficult to untie. I would not say nearly as difficult as the double fisherman's, but it can bind down pretty bad, and it could maybe take a while to untie after you've taken some bigger falls or plentiful amounts of falls. Okay, we'll get into tying this one. I keep doing that. All right, here. So to start this knot, we need a figure eight in the first place, right? So if we're going to follow through and trace back on this knot, we have to have a figure eight to start with. So I'm going to get back here. What I like to do is I'll grab the end of the rope in my hand, and I like to think of like pulling a bow. So I'm going to pull this rope to be about from the tip of my arm, and if I stretch my arm out to around my shoulder or so to give me enough length to tie the knot in the end. So, I mean, everyone's got different body types. You may find that you have to pull it pretty far, maybe not like a full arm span, but maybe towards your bicep or something like that. But for me in particular, I like to go from end of the rope towards my shoulder, just a little bit before, and then at that point I'm going to drop it. Now, does anyone remember what this is called? Just this piece here that we have.
Bite.
That's a bite, yep. So at this point I could, if I wanted to, tie the figure eight follow through on a bite, but we're not going to be doing that. We're just going to use this bite to start off our actual figure eight. So I have the end over here, and then I have the rope chilling over here. And from my point of view, when I'm looking at it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass in front of this loop. So I'm going to be wrapping around in general. You can wrap right or left. It does not actually matter that much, as long as you first cross over and then come around and then go through the front is what I'm going to be doing. So the end of my rope is on the left side, chilling over here. I'm going to cross in front of that rope. So now I've made a cross. And I'm going to wrap all the way around and go through the front here. And that's how I like to start off my figure eight. So essentially we have that figure eight stopper that we're working with, right? But now it's got a decent amount of rope left over. And this is the rope we're going to be using to do the follow through and finish that tie-in point, right? So now at this point, what you would typically do is you'll start this off and then you'll feed this through your tie-in points or tie-in point, depending on which type of harness you're using. In this case, I'm not going to put it through anything because I'm not currently wearing a harness, but I'll just pretend that it's going through an object. So there are several ways you can go about this. There is, this could be like left-handed or right-handed version of the figure eight. I don't really think there's a good way to define which one's which, but the knot can be mirrored in and of itself. So what I'm going to do to start off and make sure it ends up in the right orientation is I'm first going to look at this loop right here and be sure that it's on top of whatever I'm about to tie with. If I'm looking at the knot from this orientation, I don't know, I found that it can be a little bit more difficult to follow through and kind of figure out what's going on, but I mean, you can still absolutely tie it while looking at it this way. But I just like to make sure that what I'm tying in is under that little band right there. So the first thing I'm going to do is put it through my tie-in point, put it through my object, and then I'm going to push this bottom piece of rope to the side. And I'm going to take my end of rope and I'm going to come in right next to that loop there. So essentially this would be connected to something. And now I am retracing the original figure eight, right? So I'm going to be following the path of this rope the entire way as I go through, making sure I take extra caution to keep this rope in the same position relative to this guy, right? So as I go through, I put it through there. I'm going to follow it by wrapping behind my main line here. So as you can see, it's making a nice parallel line as I go through. when I get to this point, so I've wrapped up and around this rope, when I come to this front bit here, I need to go into the knot now, because you see as this part of the rope's passing into the knot. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to pick this hole in the bottom, and I'm going to just go straight into it. And you'll know that as I pull it tight, or start to pull it kind of tight, we're still running very parallel to the original knot, right? So I've run up through here, around, in, and then into the knot itself. Now we're wrapping on the bottom here. So we're at this part here. So you have 2, 2. This one only has 1 at the moment, so we're wrapping on that part. I'm going to go below it, just like this. And you'll see I'm still very nice and parallel. Everything's lining up wonderfully. And then at the end here, on the back part, I need to go into the final part of the knot, which is the top up here. So there's just a nice open, convenient hole right there. I'm just going to pick that and then pass it through. So now I've tied the figure 8 follow through. I need to tighten it properly now, right? So what we're going to do is we have technically 4 strands that we're working with. We have this strand and this strand, and then we have both sides of the loop here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull every possible combination of those to make sure it's tightened down properly. So I'll hold on to this one, and I'll pull this rope, and then this rope as well. And I'm going to switch to this rope, and I'm going to pull, again, this rope and this rope as well. That's going to ensure that when it's used for something like a tie-in point, that it's properly seated, it's properly stretched and strained, to where if you do take a fall, it's going to, sit the way that it should. It's not going to tighten down all weird. It's going to, ideally be a little bit easier to untie after you're done. So yeah, this is pretty much what your figure 8 would look like if you were to tie into a rope. You could also use a figure 8 just as an anchor point. So maybe if I wanted to attach a rope to a tree to build some sort of top rope situation, then you could use a figure 8. And this is good to tie around any object that you want. It could go around a tree, like I said. It could go onto a clip somewhere. You could use it to, maybe your car breaks down and you want to have a tow line and you have some sort of like utility rope. You could tie a figure 8 around the tow point of your car, and that would, this is a pretty dang strong knot that you could use. Obviously, if you do something like that, make sure you use a strong enough rope to make that work. But yeah, super chill kind of way to build the rope here. So now if I wanted to do it on a bite, as I mentioned before, now I'm going to dump that figure 8 away. I'm going to take a little bit of extra rope. You can untie yours if you need some more line. To tie the figure 8 on a bite, you pretty much just tie the regular figure 8 as you would with an end of a rope, but instead you're doing it with a bite of rope, right? So if I have a bite of rope and I just pull a good bit here, I'm going to drop it. And what I did before was I just went behind the rope. Ooh, there we go. And I'm going to pass in here and just build that figure 8. So I'm going to trace a figure 8. You can do it from either behind or in front, but I'm going to get a figure 8 that's going to sit there like that. So I'll do that one more time because the bite version is a little funky. So if I have a bite of rope sitting here, we're treating all pairs as if they were a single strand. So when you have, the actual bite itself sitting here doing its thing, and then you have the rest of the rope going down, this is all one strand as far as we're concerned. So I'm going to drape it with my end over here. I like to pass it behind. So now I'm keeping everything nice and parallel and hopefully organized. And if I pass it behind, that means I have to also come in through behind. That's the defining part of the figure 8, is you're going to pass behind, wrap around, and then come in from behind as well. And if I do that, keeping an eye to the dressing of the knot, I want to make sure that it all dresses out really well. And then this is the exact same knot, like literally in every possible way, this is the exact same knot. You just tie it with a different method. This you cannot, put into a harness. You would have to set this on top of something or connect it directly into a carabiner in order for this to work out. It has its own particular uses. Also good as an attachment point if you do use a carabiner like that, but if you're using a carabiner, it has to be secure. You want to find maybe 2 attachment points, something like that. Are there any questions on the figure 8 on a bite or as a follow through? That's one of the most important knots you can learn for climbing. If you're going to go to a climbing facility, if you're going to learn any knot, that's probably the first one you're going to learn if you don't remember it. So yeah, the next knot's a little bit more advanced, also quite useful. This is going to be kind of dropping back to why we have a prusik cord or a cordelet loop in the first place. So that's going to be, the prusik loop, or the prusik in general. So this whole setup is called a prusik loop, but the actual knot that's on the red rope right there, that's the actual prusik itself, right? So what a prusik is it falls under a category of knots called slide grips, right? So it's going to be a knot that can slide along a rope, but when you pull the loop portion that's connected to the knot, it's going to grip the rope and hold on to it. So it's kind of a way to track your progress and keep you on a climbing rope, and you can move it when you want it to move. Now, the prusik in particular, like I said, this is a part of a group of slide grip knots. There's a lot of other ones. The prusik is probably one of the most secure that you can make out of any of the rest of them, but it's, as with any of the slide grip knots, it's pretty dependent on the material that you're using and the diameter of both the cord and the rope that you're wrapping it around. So you'll note in this picture that the blue rope is much thinner than the red rope is. That's, I mean, first of all, if you're going to tie a prusik, the thinner rope has to be on like what the prusik's made of, and then the thicker rope is what you're attaching the prusik to. If you try to do the reverse, it's just not going to work. It simply will not do. Now, I understand that all of you might not have like an actual, like, you know, prusik cord or like a separate rope to work with right now, so I might just be showing you this. But if you do, I mean, I see you around an armchair. That's actually pretty innovative. That's nice. Yeah, we're going to go ahead and go off screen share, and I'll go over it. So luckily, the prusik is very, very easy to explain if you remember the girth hitch that we talked about earlier. So I have a loop of cord. So the first thing that you need is, yeah, a loop of cord. I've tied the ends together so I can make that loop. And then you just need a running piece of rope that's just going to be chilling, pretty much doing nothing. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to drape it over my shoulder, I guess, and we'll just kind of show it with the drape over my shoulder. I like to hold on to the knot of the loop that I'm working with. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie 3 girth hitches in a row on the same loop, basically. So again, just a girth hitch normally is going to be, I pass this rope over, and then I guess I like to put the rope behind. I'm going to put the knot inside of this just extra loop that I have. And technically, if I pull that tight, that makes a girth hitch like we saw in that first picture, right? But I'm not done yet. I want to keep going. So I'm going to keep wrapping in the same direction, and I'm going to put it through this loop 3 times, and that's going to give me a prusik. So I'll go through again, and I'm going to go through again, I guess. Now, if I tighten it down, it's going to start to look a little gross if I haven't dressed it. It's going to start to look kind of fumbled up. It's not really, you know, working out well. So all you need to do is straighten out all the coils so that way they're nice and neat next to each other. So I'm going to take just a moment to put them next to each other all nice and neat, like I was saying. And once you do that, if you tighten it down, come on, work with me. Then you'll get all these loops tight and next to each other, no curls or anything, and then one band of rope that kind of keeps it all together with the actual loop of your prusik coming through the core of all those coils, right? So the functionality of this is if I have a rope that's just up attached to something, right? I can grab this, you know, actually grab the prusik itself, and then I can slide it and move it along a rope. You can see that I'm feeding the rope here, right? But if I want to stay tight on this rope, so if I want to stay connected to this portion of the rope, what I'll do is I'll grab the loop instead, or I'll be attached to the loop. And if I crank down on it, it's not going to move. You'll even see that it kind of tightened down on the rope. And now it's not moving at all. So with just a single prusik, you can't really do much. But if you have, you know, 2, 3 of these connected to a rope, maybe one's connected directly to your body, and then another one's for your hand, you have another one for your foot perhaps. You can shift the weight off of yourself and onto your foot, vice versa. You can keep switching it, and then you can kind of caterpillar your way up a rope using just prusiks. Super fun thing to do, really neat skill. A lot of arborists will be doing that. Typically, they'll have like actual like pieces of gear that grab onto a rope. You don't have to tie knots just to get up a rope. There's lots of gear that can do that as well. Yeah, so the prusik is going to allow you to do something like that. Like I said, it does grab quite a bit. So if you put your full body weight on this system as is, and it's just, you know, tightening that down, when you go to move it, you might grab it and try to move it, and it's going to be kind of stuck-ish. That's just because the prusik likes to really, really grab onto the rope. So yeah, there are other slide grip knots, but this is the most basic, one of the more useful ones. You can only tie this on cord, I will say as well. You might have seen on that girth hitch picture earlier, we had webbing that kind of strap like flat stuff. If you try to tie a prusik with that, it's going to be very difficult to make that actually hold and work. So try to use this type of knot only on cord. That's my biggest tip on this one. So I'll go ahead and rewind real quick. We'll do it one more time just to make sure that we have the tying of it down. So yeah, I'm going to pass that up, get my hair out of the way. So we have the loop in one hand and then the knot in the other. I like to pass it around the rope. So now it's behind the rope, and I'm going to be putting the knot through the side that has the loop 3 times. So I have to keep wrapping around the rope to do so. So I've gone through 3 times. I'll try to tighten it down, and I'm going to dress it. I actually got it first time. Nice, look at that. Once I've dressed it and all the coils are neat and next to each other, there's no twists or anything weird going on, it'll look super aesthetic, it'll look nice. And I'll have that band wrapping around right there. Then at that point, it is ready for use, as I said before. So I can grab the knot itself, the actual coils, and I can move it up and down, no problem. And then if I want to tighten down on the rope, I grab the actual loop, and that's going to grab onto the rope and stop me from going down. Again, like I said, super dependent upon the material you use. This is a pretty thin cord. I believe this cord is 6 millimeters, I want to say. And then this actual rope is about 9.8 millimeters. So there's like 3.8 millimeter difference. That's quite a bit with rope diameter. So that's why it's able to grab on pretty well. Smaller cord doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to grab on better. So if I had, say, 1 millimeter cord, it's going to more strangle the rope, and then it probably won't actually slide. Like it might just strangle the crap out of the rope, and then it won't do anything else. So there's something of a sweet spot. You don't want to be too close in diameter, but you also want to have, plenty of, girth to work with, I guess. And there's actually some charts. If you look them up, you can find like what the best prusik diameter is for, X type of rope, that sort of thing. But for the most part, like 6 millimeter cord, 5 millimeter cord is kind of the standard for when you're dealing with climbing ropes between 8 millimeters and like 11 millimeters or so. Like all that stuff will work, just at varying degrees of, how good it is. So yeah. Any questions on the prusik? Oh, by the way, it is bi-directional, by the way. I forgot to mention that. So you can pull it either direction and it will not move. It's good to go. Sweet. I actually don't quite remember. We might have one more knot, we might not. Let's see. All right, yeah, so that is the end of the presentation then. So that's all the knots that I have. Those are like super basic, like super surface level, like those will get you going. But there's a lot of other knots to go through. I'll go back just to the slide here again. Animated knots has a lot of different categorized things. You can look at boating knots, fishing knots, scouting knots, search and rescue, that type of stuff. And then, climbing as well. So a lot of these knots are going to be super useful. I believe every single knot that we went through is probably on here. We see the girth hitch, we see the prusik, we see the figure 8 follow through, all that stuff. But there's a lot of other knots that are super great as well. You'll see where the double fisherman's is as well. I guess I'll kind of pan over this. To the right, we also have that double overhand stopper. That's just really the double fisherman's, but you just take one of the ropes away, and then you have double overhand stopper going there. So yeah, if you are more curious, then totally look at this website. There's full instructions, full stats on how all this stuff works, full suggestions for how to, go about getting the right diameters, all that stuff on this website. So hopefully that can answer a lot more of your questions if you have questions about the newer knots that I didn't talk about today. And if you do have any questions about knots in general, I always love talking about knots. So just hit me up and then I'll help you out. So are there any closing comments, things for the betterment of the group, questions, that sort of thing?
Thank you, Josh.
Yeah, of course. Sweet. All right. Well, in that case, I will probably stop this recording and then we can go about our days.